we need to get this mentioned. Fine-tuning. Somebody says, fine-tuning, never heard a good rebuttal to the issue. Christopher Hitchens was in the back of a car once, I think with like Doug Wilson or someone, and he was asked, are there any good religious arguments? And he says, the fine-tuning, the sort of hair's breadth balance, it's sort of, it does sort of, And he sort of said it was something that really did actually trouble him. And a lot of atheists, possibly influenced by that clip, I don't know, seem to say that the most powerful religious argument is the fine-tuning argument. And so, what's the question that atheists can't answer? Why are the constants of the universe so finely tuned? There are constants which govern the physical universe, things like the strength of gravity, the strength of the strong and weak nuclear force, this kind of stuff. Like, if these had different values, by, whatever it is, 1 part in 1 times 10 to the minus billion or whatever, the universe couldn't exist. It's just like balance on a knife edge. If gravity was slightly stronger, then the universe would have collapsed in on itself. If it was slightly weaker, then everything would have flown apart so fast that even atoms couldn't form. So there are 3 options here. The constants of the universe are so finely tuned because of chance, because of necessity, or because of design. Chance seems ludicrous because the odds are just so unfathomably small. Necessity seems maybe possible, but like there doesn't seem to be any like logical reason why something would like the strength of gravity would have to be what it is. And the only thing left there is design, which requires something like God. So by ruling out design as an atheist, how do you answer this question?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'd say that I share the intuition that this is thorny.
Really?
Like, and this it quite often gives me pause for thought. I think that the primary way that I think an atheist could respond to this is to again draw on questioning the justification of the notion of possibility when stretched to ways the universe could be. So this is kind of broadly an argument from analogy, right? It's like Paley's watch, but with the entire universe. The universe is so finely tuned. If it was off by a fraction of a tiny number, then everything would collapse and we'd all be doomed. If we were to find a similarly intricate object in the world, we would say, well, of course that was designed. And again, it's interesting to bring this full circle from the beginning of the podcast. This is very similar to a point that Hume touches upon, where he again just questions the justification that we have for saying things could have been different, because it's like, well, what do we mean could there? As in, sure, it's non-contradictory to say things could have been different, but like, what do we genuinely mean? Like, it seems like we need a meatier sense of could than that. And also, he throws together like almost like off the top of his head like a load of other hypotheses because they're kind of equally, So he says, it could be that God is not intelligent but just really prolific. Just if you do something an infinite number of times, then you'll eventually have this, which is kind of which is basically chance, but saying, well,
yeah. So some people do take the chance route, and they just say that we live in a multiverse, which I've spoken to people who believe in the multiverse, not the kind of multiverse that I think would actually work here, but there are people who just say, yeah, there's a multiverse. We have no. Seems like we couldn't even possibly have evidence to sort of indicate that's the case, but it does like explain it. Okay, there's one hypothesis.
I mean, so and the other one he says is that we don't really know what he's talking about order generally. He says we don't really know how ordered or disordered universes could be.
Yes,
is one of that's the kind of skepticism about the notion of possibility,
and that's more taking the necessity line.
Yes, exactly.
Say had the law of gravity been different by 1 part in whatever it is, the universe couldn't exist. Is not the same thing as saying there's a 1 in like a 1 part in 10 to the whatever chance.
So
that it does exist because the sort of the room to maneuver in terms of what would have been different had it been different is not the same thing as the chance that it could have been different.
Yes, exactly. So basically the problem there is, well, how do you define a probability space on the ways the universe could have been, because we don't have any sort of observations there. And Hume's point is not necessarily that that either of these are well. So the dialogue kind of runs where Philo, the character in Hume's dialogue, says this, and then the response that he gets is, but like, isn't the idea of an intelligent God just so much more plausible? And then his response is to say something like, well, idea of what is plausible is solely intra-universal. It doesn't step outside the universe. It's just form within it. Outside the universe, he's like, well, it's not necessarily that all bets are necessarily off, but that we don't know what bets are on. Is his point. So it's more of an agnostic point than an atheist point. He says, he says he doesn't know the answer, but he also thinks that we are ill-equipped to know the answer. But I don't know, man. I guess, I don't know. It's just, doesn't it? On the other hand, doesn't it just seem like the universe definitely could have been tuned differently, and it definitely isn't?
Maybe, but there is a question that's sometimes asked as to if this is by design. Like God designs everything, including presumably the parameters by which universes can and can't exist. And so there is this mystery of like, well, why would it be so difficult? Like if the universe is what everything exists for, the universe exists for the creation of humankind, that's like the purpose of it all, then why would the parameters be set such that they're balanced on such a knife edge? Why wouldn't it be that like the sort of meta laws of the universe were such that it could exist in all kinds of different conditions? Now, I've never found that a very convincing response, but I must say that I spoke recently to my friend Phil Halper, who I've mentioned on this show before. He's got some wonderful ideas, and we were talking about Gnosticism, the tradition in Christianity. And I've been banging on about Gnosticism, and everybody seems to hate me for it online at the moment. At least the Christian community are taking umbrage with how much I mention it. But like, in some Gnostic traditions, there's this idea that the material world is created by this like evil demiurge, that the true God is this immaterial spiritual being, and that the material world is created by an evil or malevolent sort of figure. And so the Christian Gnostic position is many times that Jesus is sent by the Father to enter the material world and sort of help people to throw off their material conditions and regain sort of their spiritual truth. Whatever. And Phil pointed out that the fine-tuning argument seems to work better for a Gnostic cosmology than a sort of traditional monotheistic one, because you've got these meta conditions which seem to have been designed such that it's like near on impossible to create a material universe, because the true God, the true sort of creator of everything, didn't want it to happen. Because the material world is evil and bad and incompetent and all this kind of stuff. And so the true God sort of sets the parameters so that it's nearly impossible. Like it's as impossible as it can be for a material world to come into existence. But the evil demiurge balances everything just right to bring it into existence. Yeah, I thought that was quite a novel point.
Yeah, I know. That's fantastic. I hadn't thought of that. I'd be surprised if anyone had thought of that.
Yeah.
That's art.
I can't remember where he got it from. I wish he probably got it from somewhere. I wish I could credit it, but it was a really interesting thought. Which, it's a bit silly. I'm being a bit silly here, but it does point out that like it kind of just depends where your intuition's like. I mean, why is everything balanced on a knife edge? That question can be asked in both directions. Yes, the theist can say, look, if atheism is true, then why is everything just balanced on a knife edge? And I could say, if like theism is true, why is everything balanced on a knife edge?
Yeah.
It's the same question.
Yeah, I mean, there's again, it trades on this idea of like, well, once you're at the level of meta laws, how likely is it that the laws of the universe were a certain way?
Yeah,
we're just so outside the realm of anything that we normally reason about that I find it hard to come to any conclusion whatsoever, apart from just throwing my intuition at it and kind of grasping at something, and it's like, oh yeah, it kind of seems like it would be unlikely.
Yeah,
but when I think about all of the other times that I infer something is unlikely, I'm taking a set of previous experiences or other people's previous experiences or what I know about the laws that govern this universe and coming up with a hypothesis about how likely it is that a given set of possibilities will emerge.
Yeah.
But I don't have any of the prior data once I step outside to the meta laws of the universe.
It seems to me like if the fine-tuning argument is correct, that it is exceedingly unlikely for the constants of the universe to be as they are and that they needed to be in order to create the universe, that either God really didn't want the universe to exist. Like he created things so that like he really did not want this to happen. And maybe somewhere in the sort of infinite realm in which he exists, it just had to happen at some point. Or he really did want it to happen because he balanced these laws so perfectly, but he's somehow constrained by these, like, imagine like the immaterial creator God before the existence of the universe is constrained by the strength of gravity. and the strong nuclear force.
Well,
What can that even mean? How can God be constrained by the strength of the strong and weak nuclear forces in creating the universe? That just sort of seems unthinkable to me.
Well, I think this draws upon a wider point we've touched upon a number of times, which is that there's an open question about if God does a lot of grounding for theistic philosophy, and quite right too. Right, this is like right back to like Aquinas and long before then. God does a lot of grounding, and it's a good philosophical job if you can get it. So it makes sense why he would. But then the meta question of what grounds the things that seem to constrain God is like things like the laws of logic, which classically constrain God. It's like, well, God can't ground something that seems metaphysically prior to him and is constraining what he can do. And the meta laws of the universe is another one. It's like, well, if God made the meta laws of the universe, then in what sense does if God is constrained by the meta laws of the universe and had to do this fine-tuning thing, then it seems like what's grounding those meta laws?
Yeah, so he's either constrained by these meta laws, which is like really weird, because it means God is constrained by things like the force of gravity or the strength of gravity. And if he's not constrained by them, then it seems really weird that he designed things so that they seem so constrained.
Yes, and I mean this comes up with lots of other things, like the laws of morality. I mean, classically, this comes up in its like really nascent form in the Euthyphro dilemma, but has been developed a lot since then. Which is that if God is the thing that grounds the laws of morality, then from God's perspective, the laws of morality are morally arbitrary. Yeah. Which is amazing, right? That's that then there is just a kind of, well, he must have some other reason. Don't know what it is, but there is this what God grounds can't ground God, and what God is constrained by he can't ground. And sometimes it's very helpful for him to be constrained by things, and sometimes it's very helpful for him to ground things. But each of those has philosophical trade-offs, because once they're in one position, it seems very unintuitive that it would be in the other position. So
yet another question which gives us pause, is difficult. I can't say that we've solved the problem. And like you say, it sort of, it gives you a lot of trouble. I mean, I wouldn't say it's like easy. It's just not my favorite argument. I mean, a lot of people say this is like their best religious argument, is the one that they struggle with the most. I mean, I find something like the existence of consciousness more compelling for theism than something like fine-tuning. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe I just haven't thought about it.
I think for me, the most troubling one we've looked at today is the self-undermining one.
Yeah,
that's the one that genuinely does keep.
Yeah, like the argument from reason.
Yes, yeah. That's like that.
I certainly find that the most interesting, and maybe also actually the most like difficult to respond to, but maybe not quite as like just moving as the consciousness that I am like constantly like in and aware of. Although you're not always aware of your consciousness. Even though you are conscious all the time you're awake, you're not always aware of it. I think
it's kind of transparent quite a lot.
Josh Rasmussen said he talked something about the difference between noticing a tree and noticing that you've noticed a tree.
Yeah, I mean,
and it's sort of the second one that you need to really be thinking about consciousness as opposed to just being conscious. I can't remember sort of the exact phrase he used, but it was something like that. At any rate, these are all questions which, I can't say like we've answered them, but to say that they're questions that atheists can't answer, I know it's a good clickbaity video title, but I hope people have found some interest in listening to us give it an attempt and found us to be relatively fair on our treatment. I mean, I think a lot of this can be summed up in a question or a response that I got on Twitter that somebody said when I put out a tweet asking for questions. What's the question that atheists can't answer? Somebody said, most questions. That's what makes us different to everyone else.
Oh. Okay,
admitting that we can't answer questions, but it's the fact that we admit that we don't know that makes us atheists. I don't know if that's a bit too self-congratulatory to say or to end on, maybe, but like I wouldn't just describe that to atheists, but I do think that this sort of basic response that seems underneath almost all of our responses here, that clarify, we don't know. I don't know the answer. I don't know what consciousness is. I don't know how to justify reason, but it's not clear to me that theism necessarily helps, and it's not clear to me that the certainty that theism sort of gives people is legitimate. The best that I can say is that I don't know the answer to a lot of these questions, but I certainly would be a far cry from saying that it's impossible for atheists to one day answer them, at least.
Yes, I think another thing that I kind of general takeaway from this discussion is that almost any ambitious philosophical view will have trade-offs to it. It is almost any philosophical view has questions that it cannot answer. And I think that that's very, very interesting. It's one of the things that allows philosophy to continue, is hopefully one day we'll converge upon a perfect, total philosophy.
And I think it'd be interesting to maybe sit down with a theist and do a series of questions that theists can't answer. Why does the mind map onto the brain so perfectly if it's not just the same thing as the brain? Why is there suffering in the world if God is good? The Euthyphro dilemma, these kinds of things, like that, there are perennial questions that people have been raising for thousands of years to theists in the same way they've been doing to atheists. And I'm kind of glad in a way that no one really has an answer, because not only would I be out of a job, but also out of a hobby.
Yes, that's what I.